What if one quiet afternoon the owner of a massive company walked into a place that wore her name and uncovered something she was never meant to see? In a forgotten corner of Mississippi, beneath the blinding southern sun, a small gas station bore the red and white crest of Wayfield Gas, one of hundreds across the country. But inside its worn walls, the people who kept it running weren't just underpaid. They were trapped, stifled by fear, suffocated by silence. Until that day, until she walked in. Eleanor Vance didn't plan to stop there. She almost passed the place entirely, but fate has a strange way of guiding you exactly where you're meant to be. The late afternoon sun blazed across the highway, its amber glow stretching over cracked asphalt like a golden thread unraveling toward Jackson. Inside a sleek black sedan, Eleanor adjusted her sunglasses with one hand, the other steady on the wheel. The air conditioning hummed softly, cutting through the heat with artificial coolness, but even that couldn't soothe the unrest brewing in her chest. She'd been driving for hours, weaving through the southern arteries of America, checking in, unannounced, on the ground-level heartbeat of her empire. Owning one of the largest gas station chains in the country meant little if she didn't understand how that name felt on the tongues of the people who wore the uniform. Reports were numbers, but people were stories, and Eleanor had always trusted stories more than spreadsheets. Eleanor had always trusted stories more than spreadsheets. In her mid-50s, Eleanor carried the aura of a woman who had wrestled life into submission more than once. She had grown up on grit, a factory father who gave every breath to machines, a mother whose legs gave out before her will. Eleanor had earned everything with the quiet rage of someone who had been underestimated her entire life. The fuel gauge blinked. Nearly empty. Perfect, she muttered, spotting a Wayfield sign ahead. The station sat like a forgotten relic at a quiet intersection, rusting slightly at the edges, weary from years of service. She pulled in beside pump number 3, stepped out into the heavy, humid air. The scent of gasoline clung to her skin like memory. Something felt off. There was no laughter, no idle chatter, only movement, mechanical, distant. A young man stalked the outside cooler with the detachment of someone whose thoughts were somewhere safer. Inside, an older woman moved behind the register, her shoulders taut with invisible weight. Eleanor capped her tank and stepped inside. The bell above the door gave a weak chime. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sickly hue across rows of stale snacks and half-empty drink coolers. At the coffee station, the pot looked like it had been burning for hours. Eleanor poured herself a cup, more for the ritual than the flavor. The older woman, Miriam, her name tag read, struggled with the receipt printer. Her hands trembled ever so slightly, as though each task took more energy than she had left. Eleanor greeted her softly. "A glass afternoon, ma'am," Miriam replied, the words thin as paper, the smile even thinner. Eleanor took her time, watching, observing. Then the door creaked open. Heavy boots, a broad frame, a rolled-up button-up, a manager badge pinned to the chest like a weapon. Dustin Crowley. The moment he saw Miriam, his face darkened, his voice sliced through the stale air. "Damn it, Miriam. How many times do I have to tell you to move faster?" Time seemed to freeze. Customers paused mid-motion. The young man outside stopped, but quickly looked away. "I'm sorry, Mr. Crowley," Miriam whispered, voice quivering. "Sorry doesn't cut it," he snapped, stepping closer, towering over her. "You're too slow. Get it together or get out." Eleanor's grip tightened on her coffee cup, her stomach coiled. She had seen abuse before, subtle, coded, polished in corporate lingo, but this was naked cruelty. And what chilled her more was the silence. No one interfered, not the customers, not the other workers. They had all learned to keep their heads down. She stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said calmly, as if she hadn't just witnessed a public humiliation. "Do you happen to have any promotions on fuel today?" Crowley barely looked at her. "No." "Are you sure?" she continued, voice light. "Other Wayfield stations are offering discounts." Now he looked annoyed. "This station operates under my rules. If there were a discount, I'd know." Eleanor smiled politely, her tone even. "And you also decide employee schedules?" "What's it to you?" he snapped. "I'm just curious. Seems like a lot of responsibility, keeping things running fairly." "I run this place how it needs to be run," he said coldly. Eleanor nodded, filed his arrogance away for later. She took a seat near the front window. From there, she could see everything. Miriam's hands still trembled. The younger workers moved like ghosts, silent, cautious, conditioned. No one looked up. No one spoke. It was as if fear had soaked into the walls. Near the back, she caught a hushed conversation. "You worked until midnight again?" one young man whispered. A second man with whiskers explained. "This wasn't just a bad manager, it wasn't just a bad day. This was systemic, and it had gone unchecked for far too long." And Eleanor Vance wasn't about to walk away. Behind the snack shelves, a young woman whispered while quietly restocking the shelves. "You worked that late again?" Miriam gave a cautious glance toward Dustin before replying in a hushed tone. "It's fine. I don't want to give him a reason to cut my hours." The younger woman frowned, lips pressing together, but said nothing. That kind of silence was learned. It wasn't agreement, it was survival. From her booth, Eleanor felt her stomach twist again. This wasn't a bad day. It was a way of life here, a culture of fear, carefully cultivated and silently endured. Her fingers tightened around the warm ceramic of her coffee cup, heart thudding with a rising fury she kept carefully masked. Then the silence shattered. "I'm done. I quit." The voice came from the front, young, shaking with rage and exhaustion. A boy, barely more than 20, ripped off his Wayfield apron and threw it on the counter, his face flushed with frustration, his fists trembling with a cocktail of adrenaline and hopelessness. A female co-worker gasped, "Cody, wait." But Cody didn't stop. His voice cracked with weariness. "No. I'm done putting up with this. Every damn shift it's the same. We're overworked, underpaid, and we have to deal with him." He jabbed a finger toward Dustin, who looked at him with that same detached smugness Eleanor had come to recognize, the expression of a man who had faced zero consequences for far too long. "You throwing a tantrum," Dustin said coolly. "Go ahead. Walk out. I don't need employees who can't handle real work." Cody let out a bitter laugh, one that sounded more like a sob in disguise. "You don't need employees, period. That's why everyone's quitting." Eleanor leaned forward slightly, heart pounding. Her eyes met Cody's for just a fleeting moment as he stormed past her booth. But in that second she saw it all. The frustration, the heartbreak, the exhaustion of someone who had given more than he could afford and got nothing in return. And Cody saw something too. A stranger who was watching, listening maybe, finally someone who cared. The door slammed behind him. Dustin turned to the others. "Anyone else?" Silence, the kind that isn't peaceful but suffocating. He smirked. "That's what I thought." Eleanor placed her coffee down with deliberate care. She had seen enough. Outside, the air still pulsed with heat, the hum of cars rolling by in the distance. She climbed into her car, but didn't start it. Instead, she sat, the scene replaying in her mind. Not just Dustin's cruelty, but the fear. Why didn't they speak up? Why was Miriam so afraid? Why did no one report anything? Because someone didn't want it reported. She didn't drive away. Instead, she pulled around the back of the building into a gravel lot where the world grew quieter. No customers. Just rusted dumpsters, a few metal chairs used for break time, and the soft thud of a trash bag hitting the bin. A boy no older than Cody sat hunched over his phone, dark circles under his eyes. Eleanor reached into her bag, pulled out a worn leather notebook, and started writing. She recorded everything. Cody's outburst, Miriam's fear, the dead silence from the other workers, Dustin's indifference. The questions began to multiply. How many had quit in the last year? Why hadn't corporate flagged this? Or had they and ignored it? She opened the employee database on her phone. It took seconds to find someone who'd recently left. Marcus Evans, former night cashier, 10 months of service. No reason listed for his departure. That omission told her everything. He messaged him directly. "Hi Marcus, this is Eleanor Vance, CEO of Wayfield Gas. I'd like to ask you about your time at Station 17. I understand if you'd rather not, but I deeply appreciate just a few minutes of your time." She hesitated, thumb hovering, then hit send. A response came almost immediately. "We'll talk. When and where?" Eleanor smiled slightly. "Tomorrow, 9 o'clock a.m. There's a cafe a few blocks from the station. I'll buy the coffee." "Fine." 9 o'clock. She exhaled, slipped the phone into her bag, and finally turned the ignition. The next morning, she was there early. The cafe had character, brick walls aged by time, the smell of ground beans and warmth. She chose a booth by the window. It felt safe but exposed, like she needed to be reminded that silence wasn't an option anymore. Right on time, Marcus walked in. Late 20s, pale under the eyes, shoulders slightly slumped, like the weight of too many night shifts had etched itself into his spine. He scanned the room until he saw her. "You're really the CEO?" Eleanor gestured to the empty seat. "I wouldn't pretend to be someone with this much paperwork." He let out a short, tired laugh and sat. A waitress passed. "Black coffee," he murmured. For a while, neither spoke. The hum of conversation filled the space between them. Finally, Marcus spoke. "You want to know about Dustin?" Eleanor nodded. "Tell me what happened." "At first," Marcus began, "it was just long hours. I figured I had to prove myself. But then, if you asked for fewer shifts, your hours vanished. If you did more, they'd never pay the overtime. And if you said anything at all, he'd find ways to punish you." She leaned forward. "How? Nothing that leaves bruises. But your schedule? Suddenly you're working every holiday, or not at all. Paychecks accidentally short. Breaks get forgotten. And if you complain, the reports vanish." Eleanor's brows drew together. "Vanish?" "Yeah. A few of us tried. Filed formal complaints. But nothing happened. Then the complaints disappeared from the system. That's when we realized he wasn't working alone." "Roger Quinn," Eleanor said. Marcus's eyes flickered. "You know him?" "Regional supervisor, oversees multiple stations. Covers for Dustin every time," Marcus confirmed. "Shows up, shakes hands, smiles, pretends to care. Then nothing changes." "How many employees have left in the past year?" "At least 15, probably more." Eleanor leaned back, heart heavy. "That wasn't turnover. That was decay." Marcus studied her. "So why do you care?" Her eyes met his, steady. "Because this isn't just about one bad manager. It's about how many people like Dustin are out there, and how many Rogers are letting them thrive." He nodded slowly. "If you're serious, I'll tell you everything." Eleanor reached for her notebook. "Then let's begin." And she finally stepped outside, pages of notes in hand. Eleanor saw it clearly. This wasn't mismanagement. This was a system designed to erase voices. And now she had the first name, Roger Quinn. Middle management wouldn't help her. The usual chain of command was rotten. She needed more. She needed evidence that couldn't be deleted. Sliding into her car, she turned the key. She wasn't done. She was just getting started. Tomorrow, she would return to Wayfield Gas 17. But not as a silent observer. She was going back as a hunter. Eleanor arrived just as dawn broke, the light not yet golden but still cold and bluish, casting long, jagged shadows across the parking lot. The morning rush was underway. Commuters hurried inside for their coffee, breakfast sandwiches, and lottery tickets. The air carried that peculiar blend of burnt coffee, gasoline, and the warm rubber scent of tired car tires pulling in and out of the lot. Inside, it was a flurry of motion, but beneath it all lingered a quiet, unmistakable weight. Miriam was at the register, moving with the numb efficiency of someone who had long stopped hoping her effort would make any difference. Her eyes were rimmed red, her face paler than yesterday. She wasn't slow, just stripped of presence, hollowed out by exhaustion. At the back of the store, a young man Eleanor recognized from the day before, Victor, was stacking cases of bottled water. His movements were quick, too quick, as though he were racing some invisible clock. Every few minutes, his eyes flicked toward the front, toward Dustin. Dustin stood by the register, arms crossed, like a sentry guarding something sacred. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His mere presence was enough to suffocate the room. Eleanor blended in, her posture relaxed but her senses sharp. These employees weren't just doing their jobs, they were surviving, adapting. Every glance, every movement choreographed to avoid confrontation. This wasn't a team, this was a stage, and Dustin was the audience no one wanted. She needed proof. Discreetly, she pulled out her phone, activated the voice recorder, and slipped it into her inner coat pocket. Then, with casual ease, she picked up a bottle of orange juice and approached the counter. "Morning," she said, placing the bottle down. Her tone was light, almost cheerful. "You look like you've been working hard. Long shift?" Miriam hesitated, eyes dropping. I worked last night, and the night before. That's a lot of hours." Before Miriam could reply, Dustin's voice cut in. "She doesn't mind," he said smoothly, stepping closer, his voice warm but laced with control. "Right, Miriam?" Miriam nodded, her voice barely a breath. "Right." Eleanor met Dustin's eyes, holding them just long enough to register that she wasn't playing. He was watching her now, not with suspicion but with curiosity. And something else, something colder. She took her change and stepped away, pretending to stir sugar into her coffee while she listened. Then, a crash. A gallon of milk hit the floor with a heavy splash, its plastic split open, white liquid exploding across the tiles. A teenage employee stood frozen, eyes wide, hands outstretched as if he could rewind time. He looked like he wanted to disappear. Dustin was on him instantly. "What the hell is wrong with you?" His voice was sharp, slicing through the room like broken glass. "Every damn shift it's something." The store fell silent. Even the background music stopped mattering. The boy stammered, reaching for paper towels. "I didn't mean to." "You never mean to," Dustin spat. "If you can't handle stocking shelves, maybe you should find a job that doesn't require using your brain." The boy dropped to his knees, hands trembling, blotting at the spill. Eleanor saw the shame on his face, the way he couldn't meet anyone's gaze, the way no one helped, the way silence was safer. That was enough. She strode back to the counter and set her coffee down harder than necessary. Dustin looked up, surprised. "Loud morning," she said casually, tilting her head. "Do you always talk to your employees like that?" Dustin blinked, caught off guard. Then his face reset, calm, unreadable. "Just keeping things running," he said with a shrug. "You know how kids are. Give them an inch, they take a mile." Eleanor let the silence hang. "Interesting definition of standards," she said eventually. "I always thought good management meant setting an example, not humiliating people in front of customers." His jaw twitched. "This doesn't concern you, lady." She raised an eyebrow. "As a customer, it does. I come here often, and what I've seen is a pattern. People too afraid to make even a small mistake. That's not just toxic. That's bad for business." Dustin scoffed, but something changed. He shifted his stance, rolled his shoulders back. He was trying to read her now. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," he said, voice lower, smoother. "Just a little. Workplace motivation?" Eleanor didn't answer. She just stared. And then she walked. At the door, she paused just long enough to catch his reflection in the glass. He was watching her leave. Not just watching, studying, trying to figure out who she was, what she wanted. Back inside his office, Dustin replayed the security footage. Frame by frame, he watched her. Her posture, her questions, her expression. She wasn't a customer. She was something else, and she was digging. He called Raja. "We had a customer, mid-50s, sharp, asking about policies, schedules." Roger sighed. "You sure you're not being paranoid?" "She was watching us. She challenged me. Miriam acted weird when I brought her up." Roger paused. "Fine. Keep an eye on her. Let me know if she comes back." But Dustin didn't want to wait. He wasn't used to being hunted. Back at her hotel, Eleanor was scrolling through employee data. In 8 months, 20 people had left Wayfield Gas 17, triple the regional average, and most of them were either older or people of color. A pattern, a bias, and not an accident. She picked up her phone and dialed. Erin Jones. The woman on the other end sounded guarded. "I don't want to get involved." "I understand," Eleanor said. "But did you leave because of how Dustin ran that store?" Silence. Then a soft, exhausted yes. Eleanor closed her eyes. Another truth confirmed. Another piece in the puzzle. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice low and steady. "Did you ever report any of it to corporate?" There was silence on the other end of the line, then a bitter laugh. "Yeah, we all did, but it never mattered. Nothing ever changed." "Roger Quinn?" Eleanor asked, her tone sharper now. Karen didn't hesitate. "Always him. Every time we complained, he said he'd look into it, then nothing. No follow-ups, no action. It was like tossing our voices into a void." Eleanor gripped her pen, her knuckles whitening. "You're sure Roger knew?" "I'd even sent him emails," Karen said, bitterness creeping in. "Real ones. I never got a real answer, just polite excuses, like he was brushing lint off his shoulder." Eleanor thanked her and ended the call, but her mind was racing. Roger Quinn wasn't just negligent, he was complicit, a shield for Dustin, and possibly more. By late afternoon, Eleanor had seen enough, heard enough, to know this couldn't stay internal. This wasn't just a management issue. This was an infection in the system. She called Roger directly. The phone barely rang before he answered. "Eleanor," he said, voice coated in manufactured politeness. "What a surprise." "I doubt that," she replied coolly. "We need to talk." There was a pause. "About Station 17, I assume?" "I'd like to meet," she said. "In person?" Roger hesitated again. "I'm busy this week. I don't think." "I wasn't asking." Another pause, then, begrudgingly, "Fine, tomorrow morning. My office." Eleanor ended the call without another word. She stared at the screen, jaw tight. He knew why she was coming. That meant he was already crafting his defenses. The next morning she stepped into his office. It was sterile, too clean, a large desk, a single window overlooking a cracked parking lot. Roger sat with his arms folded, trying to look casual. It didn't work. "Eleanor," he said, gesturing to a chair. "What can I do for you?" She didn't sit. Instead, she placed a folder on the desk and opened it. "This is a list of every employee who's quit Station 17 in the last 8 months, she said. "Most are either older or people of color." Roger barely glanced at it. "Turnover happens. It's a tough industry. Erin Jones says she filed multiple complaints with you." He exhaled and leaned back. "Eleanor, I can't personally manage every single location. She also says you ignored them." His jaw tightened. "I looked into them, and yet here we are." Roger tapped his pen. "Look, Dustin has his way of doing things. Not everyone likes it. That doesn't mean he's doing anything wrong." "Then why are your employees too afraid to speak up?" "They're not." Eleanor let the silence stretch. Roger wouldn't meet her eyes. He closed the folder. "I'm going to investigate this further." Roger swallowed hard. "Be reasonable." "Maya being reasonable," she said, turning to leave. "Dustin isn't." That night, Roger called Dustin. "She's looking into things," he said flatly. "You need to handle it." Dustin's voice was taut. "Define handle it. Keep her out of your store. Make sure the staff stays quiet." Dustin ended the call, rage brewing. He wasn't about to be taken down by some suit. By morning, the tone at Wayfield Gas had shifted. Miriam showed up to find her shift suddenly extended, without notice. Victor was summoned into Dustin's office and given a choice: fall in line or lose hours. By noon, every employee had been forced to sign a document declaring the store was operating smoothly. And Dustin? He watched each signature, smirking. But deep down, something unsettled him. That woman, Eleanor. She wasn't done, and neither was he. That evening, Eleanor parked outside Wayfield Gas 17. The place looked different under fluorescent lights, colder, emptier. Only a few cars lingered. Drivers moved like shadows, going through the motions of refueling. She stepped out of her car and into the thick night air. The store's glass doors slid open, releasing a faint draft of cold air and the ever-present smell of burned coffee. But there was something else now, something stale, the scent of fear baked into the walls. Inside, Miriam was behind the register again, but she looked worse. Her movements were slow, deliberate, like she was counting every step, every breath. Victor was restocking, his usual rhythm fractured, shoulders stiff with silent tension. The space behind the counter was empty. "Where's the new kid?" a customer muttered. "Yelsher." "She didn't show," Miriam said softly, eyes darting toward the door like she expected Dustin to burst through at any second. Eleanor narrowed her eyes and wandered toward the fridge. She pretended to browse, but her focus was sharp. She didn't wait long. Dustin emerged, footsteps heavy. He was already angry. "Another no-show," he muttered. "That's the third one this month. What is this? A damn daycare?" Victor didn't turn, but his back straightened like a bowstring, and Klaus held. "If any of you actually knew how to work, I wouldn't have to keep replacing you," Dustin snapped. Miriam flinched. Her hands fumbled with the receipt printer. Eleanor walked to the counter and set down a bottle of water. "I couldn't help but notice," she said calmly. "Your staff seems exhausted. Are they getting paid for all this extra work?" Dustin's smirk came easily. "And what's it to you?" "Just curious," she replied. "It's rare to see so much burnout in one place." Dustin chuckled. You don't know how things run here. Then why don't you explain it to me? He hesitated. She had him cornered, and he knew it. But before he could answer, Miriam accidentally knocked over a stack of paperwork, pages scattered across the floor. Dustin's temper snapped. "Are you serious?" he growled, grabbing her wrist before she could bend down. "You can't even do this right. You're lucky I don't fire you right now." The store froze. No one moved. Not a breath. Eleanor stepped forward. "Let go of her. Now." Dustin turned, startled. His grip loosened just enough for Miriam to pull away. "I've seen enough," Eleanor said. Her voice was calm, deadly calm. "This stops. Right now." Dustin's face contorted. "Who the hell do you think you are?" From behind him, a voice whispered, just loud enough. "That's Eleanor Vance." It was a spark, and it spread like fire. Eyes turned. Employees, customers, even Victor stopped breathing. Everyone knew that name. Dustin's face lost its color. "You asked who I am," Eleanor said. "I run this company, and I don't tolerate men like you." Silence. Dustin scrambled to regain footing. "I don't know what you've heard. I've seen it with my own eyes." His mouth opened, closed. Then he smirked, trying to act unbothered. "Well, I wasn't expecting a corporate visit. If I'd known, I'd have rolled out the red carpet." Eleanor didn't smile. "You've been warned," she said. Dustin held her gaze. "We'll see about that." But she knew what he meant. He wasn't surrendering. He was planning. And so was she. Because the battle wasn't over. It had just begun. His posture shifted, shoulders loosening just enough to feign control, and he let out a sharp, theatrical chuckle. He turned to the remaining customers, his voice raised, laced with sarcastic charm. "Well, this is a surprise. Didn't expect the CEO of Wayfield Gas to grace us with her presence." A few nervous chuckles trickled from the customers, unsure whether to laugh or hold their breath. It was a performance, and he was counting on the crowd to play along. But the employees? They didn't laugh. They didn't even flinch. They just watched, silent, guarded, and weary. Dustin took a step forward, commanding the space like an actor hitting his mark. "With all due respect, ma'am," he said, words soaked in mock humility. "I don't think you understand how a gas station actually runs. See, it's not as easy as sitting behind some polished desk signing papers." Eleanor met his eyes without blinking. She knew what he was doing, pivoting, reframing the narrative. He wasn't defending himself anymore, he was performing, trying to flip the power dynamic before it got away from him. "I keep this place running," Dustin continued, his voice gaining momentum, his tone shifting into moral righteousness. "These employees, they need discipline. Without structure, you get chaos. You think customers want to walk into a filthy store? You think they want to wait in line while someone forgets how to use a register?" He gestured dismissively toward Miriam without even glancing at her. She flinched as though slapped, but said nothing. "I've worked my ass off keeping this place afloat," he went on, exhaling dramatically. "And yeah, maybe I've got high standards, but if I didn't, this whole station would be a disaster." A murmur moved through the room. Some customers nodded, their expressions uncertain, uncomfortable. A few exchanged glances, most just stayed quiet. The employees stood motionless, eyes darting between Dustin and Eleanor, waiting to see who would take the next step. Eleanor watched him, waited, letting the weight of his words settle, letting him hang himself with his own rope. Then she folded her arms and tilted her head. "High standards," she repeated. "Is that what you call it?" "That's exactly what I call it," he said, smirking like he'd won. She nodded slowly. Interesting. Because what I see isn't standards. I see fear. The store went quiet again. The smirk on Dustin's face wavered for the first time. I see employees terrified to make a mistake because they know you'll shame them publicly. I see exhaustion carved into their faces, like sleep is a luxury they can't afford. I see silence, not because things are fine, but because they know what happens if they speak up. Her gaze traveled first to Miriam, then to Victor, then to the teenage cashier near the freezer section, and finally it returned to Dustin. "You call that leadership?" Dustin scoffed, but his body betrayed him. His jaw tightened, his shoulders straightened with tension. He knew the tide was turning. "Oh, give me a break," he muttered, eyes rolling. "This isn't some charity. If they can't handle the job, they don't belong here." Eleanor didn't react. "Then explain something to me." He narrowed his eyes. "What?" She pulled out her phone and scrolled until she found the data. In the past 8 months, 20 employees have quit this station. That's nearly triple the average turnover for Wayfield locations. She looked up, her voice even. "You want to tell me that's just a coincidence?" Dustin's jaw tightened. And here's what's more interesting. Almost all of them were experienced workers, people who had been here for years, long enough to know what fair treatment should look like. She raised an eyebrow. "So, tell me, were they all just lazy too?" A hush blanketed the store. Victor shifted behind the shelves. Miriam lowered her eyes, her lips pressed tight. Even the customers had stopped pretending not to listen. Dustin forced a laugh. Hollow, brittle. Turnover happens. Some people just aren't cut out for this line of work. Eleanor didn't blink. Or maybe they just got tired of being treated like they don't matter. The silence thickened. He was losing them. She could feel it. The tension in his voice. The flicker of something like panic in his eyes. Then he changed tactics. He turned to Miriam, softened his tone, feigned empathy. "I've been trying to help you keep this job, Miriam," he said with a dramatic sigh. "But you don't seem to appreciate that." Miriam's head jerked up, her eyes wide. Eleanor's heart sank. Dustin wasn't defending himself. He was attacking again. "I could have let you go a long time ago," he went on, shaking his head as if disappointed. "But I didn't. I gave you a chance." A few customers nodded absently. The performance was working. Eleanor's jaw clenched. He was twisting the narrative, casting himself as the misunderstood savior, Miriam as the ungrateful problem. She couldn't let that stand. "If you cared about your employees," she said clearly, "why are there so many formal complaints about how you treat them?" Dustin stiffened. He stepped forward. "Why do so many former workers say they were forced into extra shifts without pay? Why do they all say they were afraid to speak up?" Dustin snorted bitterly. "People complain. That's what they do when they don't want to work." "Then explain why the ones who left were your most experienced team members. Are you saying all of them were weak too?" No response. Victor glanced at Miriam. The teenage cashier shifted as if wrestling with something inside himself. Eleanor didn't smile, but she knew she had cracked the armor. At least a little. But she also knew Dustin wouldn't go quietly. He stormed off, muttering, his boots pounding the floor. The moment he disappeared, something subtle shifted. Employees looked at one another, cautious, unsure, but something was different. The ice had started to crack. Victor lingered near the cooler, gripping a can of soda, not to drink, but like it was grounding him. He wasn't a rebel. He was the guy who kept his head down, did his job, didn't make waves, but tonight had pushed him to his limit, watching Miriam wither, watching Dustin manipulate reality. He took a shaky breath, then stepped toward Eleanor. "Ilana, I can help," he said quietly, barely a whisper. She turned, calm and steady. "They won't find out," she said gently. "I promise." He nodded slowly, swallowing his fear. "Come with me." They slipped into the narrow hallway behind the counter, past the break room and into the storage area. It smelled of cardboard and citrus cleaner, the walls lined with shelves packed with overstock and forgotten supplies. At the far wall, a corkboard held the weekly schedules. "Look," Victor said, pointing. Eleanor stepped closer. At first, nothing seemed wrong. Then she saw it. Handwritten notations scribbled next to names. Additional hours, late shifts, morning overlaps. But the printed schedule hadn't been updated to reflect any of it. She reached out, her fingers brushing the edges. "He's not logging overtime," she muttered. Victor nodded. "He makes us clock out. Then we have to stay. If we don't, our next week gets cut." Eleanor's jaw clenched. This wasn't just overwork. This was wage theft. It was coordinated, deliberate. "How long has this been happening?" Victor looked away. "A year. Maybe more." She snapped a photo with her phone. "I need this, but it's not enough." A sudden sound froze them both. The creak of a door, the dull thud of boots. Victor went rigid. "He's coming." Eleanor turned. Dustin stood in the doorway, blocking the exit, his face unreadable, but his eyes, they were fire. He shut the door behind him. "You want to tell me what you're doing?" She didn't move. "I think you already know." Dustin tilted his head. "You've got a lot of nerve, coming in here poking around." "I'm not poking," she said evenly. "I'm investigating." He laughed. Cold, joyless. "Investigating? Lady, you might sign my checks, but this is my store." Victor stepped back, fear in his eyes, but Eleanor stood her ground. "No," she said. "This isn't your store. It's not your kingdom, and it sure as hell isn't your personal playground." Dustin's smirk twitched. "You're stealing from your employees," she continued. "You're breaking labor laws, and you're arrogant enough to think no one would ever find out." Real anger rose behind his eyes. "You don't know what you're talking about." She raised an eyebrow. "Then why do you look so nervous?" His fingers curled into fists. "You think you can just walk in here and take me down?" She didn't blink. "You don't know what I'm capable of," he growled. Eleanor stared straight through him. "No," she said, "but I'm about to find out." Dustin's voice dropped low, thick with contempt. "People like you, corporate types, you don't last out here. You write your little rules, sit in your fancy offices. But here, out here, we do what we have to do to keep this place running." Eleanor didn't blink. Her voice was steady, even. "And what happens when you get caught?" The silence between them felt like a held breath. Then Dustin exhaled slowly and took a step back. His gaze drifted from Victor to Eleanor. "You're making a mistake," he said. "You think you're in control, but you're not. You don't have a clue what's coming." He turned, reaching for the door, but just before leaving he looked over his shoulder with that same arrogant smirk curling on his lips. "We'll see who actually runs this place." Then he was gone. Eleanor let out a slow breath. Victor's face was pale, his chest rising in shallow breaths. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now," Eleanor said, tightening her grip on her phone, "now we make sure he doesn't get away with it." Victor nodded, a flicker of fire beneath the fear. For the first time, this wasn't just about observation. Eleanor had crossed the line. She wasn't documenting corruption anymore. She was going to war. That night, Dustin leaned back in his office chair, watching the grainy black and white security footage of the previous night. The image jittered, but there was no mistaking it. Eleanor Vance, standing at the back of his store, staring at his scheduling board. She was poking around where she didn't belong. He had seen this before, some outsider thinking they could fix something they didn't understand. But this wasn't just any outsider. Eleanor had power, and if he didn't move quickly, she would turn his own employees against him. He picked up his phone. Get everyone into the office now. 15 minutes later, the break room was packed. Victor stood in the back, arms crossed tightly, gaze locked on the floor. Miriam wrung her hands near the door. Around them, the clerks and night staff shifted nervously. Dustin's eyes scanned the room. Then he spoke. Something's been going on, he began, his voice calm but deliberate. Someone thinks they can walk in here and tell us how to do our jobs. Someone who doesn't understand what it takes to keep this place afloat. A murmur of unease swept the room. Miriam swallowed hard. Let me be clear, Dustin continued, leaning forward onto the desk. I run this store, not some suit, not someone who'll be gone in a week. And if any of you think about talking to the wrong people, he let the threat hang in the air. Victor's jaw clenched. Miriam stared at the floor. Now, Dustin finished, straightening. Let's get back to work. They filed out, one by one, silent, shaken. The next morning, Eleanor felt it before she stepped inside. Something had shifted. The spark of rebellion from the night before was gone. The atmosphere had curdled into something heavy and tense. Inside, the employees avoided her eyes. Even Victor kept his head down. At the coffee station, she paused, scanning the store. Miriam's back was hunched deeper than usual. The young cashier pretended to be busy, but his hands weren't moving. Dustin had gotten to them. She moved to the manager's office. The door was locked. That had never happened before. In the reflection, she saw him. Dustin, watching from down the aisle. When their eyes met, he smirked and walked away. Eleanor clenched her jaw. He wasn't hiding it. He was taunting her. By noon, Victor approached her. His voice was barely audible. I can't help anymore. Did he threaten you? She asked. He hesitated. I have a family. I can't lose this job. She nodded slowly. I understand. He walked away, shoulders heavy. She wasn't angry. She was resolved. That afternoon she picked up her phone. Labor Rights Association, this is Sarah Connolly. I have a situation, Eleanor said, and I think you'll want to hear it. She laid it all out. Unpaid overtime, coercion, altered schedules. Sarah listened. If this is true, we can push for an inspection, but we'll need proof. Something solid. Eleanor looked at the locked door, the cowering staff. I'll get it. But before she could move forward, a loud crash echoed through the store. She turned to see Miriam collapsing. Her body buckled and she hit the floor, gasping. Eleanor was at her side instantly. Miriam, can you hear me? Her skin was clammy, breath short. I'm sorry, she whispered. Panic surged. This wasn't just exhaustion, it was danger. She looked up. Dustin stood at the back of the store, watching and moving. The ambulance lights painted the storefront in red and blue as paramedics rushed inside. Eleanor knelt beside Miriam, gripping her hand. I'm going with her, she told them. No one argued. As they wheeled Miriam out, Eleanor turned. Dustin was still standing there, arms folded, not alarmed, calculating. At the hospital, the doctor's face was tight. She's stable, but she's lucky. Her blood pressure was through the roof. Any more stress, and she could have had a stroke. She's been working non-stop, Eleanor said. She needs rest, and she can't go back to those conditions. She won't, Eleanor promised. She stepped into the hallway, pulled out her phone, and called a journalist. This is Ian Foster, Jackson Chronicle. I have a story for you. Eleanor said. And it's big. Back at the store, Dustin sat in his office. His phone buzzed. Roger Quinn. Tell me this is handled, Roger snapped. Handled, Dustin said. I just got a call from legal. Corporate sniffing around. Dustin leaned back, smirking. Then we make sure they don't find anything. Roger was silent. What do you mean? It's time, Dustin said, to clean up some records. That night, Eleanor returned to her hotel and opened her laptop. Everything was gone. Employee logs, time cards, reports. Deleted. She stared at the screen. Dustin had wiped it all. But then, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. A voice whispered, "Check your messages." The line went dead. A new message appeared. Attached were images, time cards, altered payroll documents, and a damning email thread between Dustin and Roger. Roger, you need to get rid of those complaints. If corporate looks, we're both screwed. Dustin, relax. They don't even know what to look for. I'll handle it. Eleanor stared at the screen. Then, slowly, a smile broke across her face. Someone inside had turned, and they had just handed her the smoking gun. Dustin Crawley paced the floor of his office, fists tightening and loosening at his sides. His laptop sat open on his desk, its screen now empty, every file gone, every altered schedule, every manipulated payroll entry wiped clean. Or so he thought. Eleanor still had proof. Someone had turned against him, and now the walls were closing in. He slammed his palm onto the desk and called an emergency meeting. Employees filed into the cramped office with wary expressions. The tension in the room clung to the walls like smoke. Everyone could feel it. Something was coming, something bad. Dustin stood at the front, his eyes cold as they scanned the room. "We've got a problem," he said, voice low and deliberate. "Someone's been talking." Victor stood stiff near the back. Miriam, her face still pale from her recent collapse, sat with her arms crossed. Around them, clerks and night staff exchanged uneasy glances. "Let me be very clear," Dustin continued, his tone tightening. "If anyone here thinks they can stab me in the back, you're making a mistake. You stay loyal, you keep your jobs. You don't—" "We've lost too many," said Elspeth, a touch heavy. He let the threat dangle. No one spoke. Then Miriam looked up. Her voice, though quiet, cut through the stillness. "You're afraid." Dustin snapped his head toward her. "Excuse me? You wouldn't be saying this if you weren't afraid," she said. A murmur spread through the room. People exchanged looks. She was right, and they all knew it. Dustin's control faltered. "Damn right I'm afraid," he snapped. "Afraid of what happens when outsiders start making decisions without knowing what it takes to run this place. You think she cares about you?" He gestured toward the door, toward Eleanor's unseen presence. Victor's voice rang out, sharp and clear. "She was there when Miriam collapsed. You weren't." Dustin froze, then turned and stormed out. At that same moment, Eleanor hit send on an email to Wayfield Gas headquarters. Attached were the documents, the altered schedules, the payroll discrepancies, the emails between Roger Quinn and Dustin. The reply came quickly. An internal investigation was underway. Corporate representatives would be on site within 48 hours. And then the media storm hit. Gas station scandal, Wayfield accused of labor exploitation. The headlines were impossible to ignore. The article detailed everything: Miriam's collapse, the falsified records, the culture of fear. Customers began to vanish. Morning traffic dried up. Dustin, cornered and spiraling, decided to fight back. That evening, he stood in front of the station surrounded by a few local reporters. Cameras rolled. "This is all a misunderstanding," he said, voice shaking. Corporate is trying to take over my store with lies. They don't care about you. They care about control." There were some sympathetic murmurs, a few nods. Then a voice rose from behind the reporters. "Am I?" Eleanor stepped forward, confident, composed. She faced Dustin with a folder in hand. "I'd like to clarify a few things," she said. She opened the folder and pulled out a printed email. "This is a conversation between Dustin and Roger Quinn, acknowledging complaints and agreeing to cover them up." She held up another paper. "This is a schedule showing falsified working hours, saved by an employee before it was deleted." Finally, she produced a payroll document. "And this shows unpaid overtime. It proves wage theft." Silence fell. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Dustin paled. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. The crowd had turned. No more sympathy, only anger. "I don't need to manipulate the truth," Eleanor said. "Because the truth is already here." Dustin's mask shattered. He laughed bitterly. "None of this proves anything. Anyone can fake documents." No one looked convinced. He turned, desperately searching for an ally. His employees wouldn't meet his eyes. Their fear had given way to fury. "You're all being manipulated," he shouted. "Corporate wants a scapegoat and they chose me. But I wasn't in charge. Roger Quinn was." Gasps. Roger, standing in the back, went pale. Dustin pointed. "He approved the overtime system. He ignored the complaints. I just followed orders." But then a voice rang out. "That's a lie." Miriam Tate stepped forward. Weaker, yes, but resolute. "You made us work off the clock. You threatened us. Don't pretend you were just following orders. You don't know what you're talking about." "I do." Victor stepped beside her. "You stole from us, treated us like we didn't matter. But we do, and we're not afraid anymore." Then others spoke. "You made me stay late without pay. You told me I'd never find another job if I quit. You laughed when I begged for a day off." Surrounded by truth, Dustin had no escape. Eleanor stepped forward. "You no longer work here. You think you can fire me?" "I just did." Corporate security approached. Dustin resisted at first, but then, as he scanned the faces and saw no allies, he stopped. Roger turned and walked away, his career in ruins. Dustin barked one last threat. "You think you've won?" Eleanor didn't flinch. "No, but you've lost." He was led away. Relief filled the air. Employees exhaled. Tears, laughter, silence. A young woman whispered, "What happens now?" Eleanor smiled. "Now, things change." Later that night, she received an email. Subject, urgent, board meeting scheduled. She exhaled. Dustin was gone. Roger was out. But the real power, the board, was waiting. The boardroom at Wayfield Gas HQ was the opposite of Station 17. Tall windows, polished wood, leather chairs, and sharp eyes. Lawrence Hodge, the chairman, spoke. "Let's be clear. This isn't about one station. It's about the future of Wayfield." Eleanor met his gaze. "I agree." And the real fight began. Lawrence raised an eyebrow, his tone clipped and corporate. "Then I assume you understand why this situation has placed us in a precarious position." A few board members nodded. Others remained silent, their expressions unreadable. Eleanor didn't speak. She waited. Lawrence exhaled, disappointment barely veiled. "Eleanor, let's be honest, you didn't handle this the right way." She tilted her head slightly. "The right way?" He spread his hands, a gesture meant to look conciliatory. "You personally intervened at a single store, escalated the matter into a national scandal, and now our stock is swinging wildly. Corporate liability teams are working around the clock to contain the damage." Eleanor inhaled slowly, steadying herself. You mean contain the truth? A flicker of irritation crossed Lawrence's face. He recovered quickly. This isn't about truth, he said, his voice calm, too calm. This is about business, and in business perception is reality. He paused, letting his words settle. By going public, you've lit a match. Employees around the country are beginning to question their conditions. We're getting complaints from multiple locations. You've started a chain reaction, and now you can't stop it. Eleanor expected this. She knew exactly how these men thought. They weren't worried about wrongdoing. They were terrified that the people they depended on might finally realize their own power. I didn't start this, she said evenly. The way this company has been run. Did? Lawrence's jaw tightened. Before he could respond, another voice chimed in. We all want Wayfield Gas to succeed, said Marjorie Steele, a sharp-owned board member in her 70s. But you have to admit, Eleanor, your leadership is unconventional. Eleanor didn't miss a beat. I prefer to call it hands-on. Marjorie's mouth twitched, amused despite herself, but Lawrence had lost patience. This is not a charity. We're a business. If we start letting employees influence policy, where does it end? Do you honestly believe Wayfield Gas can afford higher wages, better benefits, and tighter oversight without damaging the bottom line? Eleanor met his gaze. Yes. A ripple of surprise moved across the room. Lawrence laughed, short and harsh. That's naive. It's strategy, Eleanor said, producing a folder and laying it on the table. I had a team run the numbers. Dustin's station had one of the highest turnover rates in the company. Constant rehiring costs more than fair wages and respectful treatment. She turned a page. Locations with better employee satisfaction report higher retention, better customer service, and increased sales. Cutting labor costs doesn't save money, it bleeds it. More murmurs. Implementing a structured reform plan can address worker concerns while preserving profitability. If we don't, lawsuits, reputational collapse, and federal scrutiny are inevitable. She looked each board member in the eye. And if we don't adapt, competitors will. They'll poach our talent and our market. The room was silent. Then Margaret Linwood, one of the company's most senior shareholders, spoke. I agree with her. Heads turned. I didn't invest in Wayfield Gas to see it run like a sweatshop, she said firmly. She's right. We can do better. We should. The tide had turned. Lawrence knew it. So did Eleanor. By the end of the meeting, the board voted to let her proceed with a pilot reform program. Not a full victory, but a beginning. As she stepped into the hallway, a younger executive caught up with her. That was impressive. Eleanor gave him a small smile. It's only the beginning. Back in her office, the weight of the company pressed against her. The battle wasn't over. Her changes were modest, but they shook the foundation. Fair wages, eliminated forced overtime, and a new anonymous reporting system to protect whistleblowers. But resistance came, not from the top this time, but from within. Managers who had flourished under the old regime, unchecked authority, no oversight, refused to comply. At one station in Texas, a manager blatantly ignored the reforms, continuing to overwork and underpay staff. This is how we've always done it, he shrugged when confronted. Eleanor was furious. These men weren't just defying policy, they were testing her will. And then a new threat emerged. Lawrence Hodge. Unwilling to let go of his influence, he began calling shareholders, spinning a narrative that Eleanor's vision was bleeding the company dry. Strategic leaks painted a picture of chaos and declining profit. Headlines screamed, Wayfield Gas in crisis, radical reforms undermining corporate stability. Lawrence announced he was organizing a vote to remove her. The board convened. Eleanor had a choice: backpedal to appease shareholders or double down and risk it all. She chose to fight. Instead of confining the battle to the boardroom, she reached out, company-wide. She initiated a live broadcast to every Wayfield Gas employee. Standing in front of the camera, she laid bare the stakes. She explained her decisions, the financials, the long-term vision. And then she did the unthinkable. She asked employees to vote. An anonymous poll. Simple, direct. Within hours, responses flooded in. When the board reconvened, Lawrence entered confident. "This company isn't a democracy," he declared, "and Eleanor has destabilized it." Eleanor stood. She placed a folder on the table. "These are the results of the company we vote." Silence. She opened the folder. 87% of employees voted to keep her. The room reeled. Hundreds of stations, thousands of workers. Lawrence's plan crumbled. He had underestimated the force of loyalty and truth. The vote to remove her failed. As Lawrence left, defeated, he turned. "The system isn't built for people like you. It'll push back." Eleanor's voice was calm. "Then I'll push harder." The courtroom was still. The judge shuffled papers as Dustin Crowley waited, hollow and spent. His suit was rumpled, eyes sunken. "Mr. Crowley," the judge began, "you are hereby sentenced to pay restitution, perform 1,500 hours of community service, and are permanently banned from managerial roles in the service industry." Nervous swept the gallery. Eleanor, watching from the back, felt closure. Dustin stared forward, broken, defeated, alone. Roger Quinn fared no better. After his resignation, lawsuits mounted. Labor organizations backed a class action against him. No one in the industry would touch him. He was done. Wayfield Gas 17 changed. Miriam Tate, once afraid, now smiled behind the counter, finally paid fairly. "It feels different," she said. Victor Lane, now manager, ran the store with integrity. "No more fear," he told Eleanor, "only respect." Sometimes it takes one person to say, "Enough." Eleanor Vance hadn't planned to start a revolution. She was a businesswoman, but when she saw the truth, she chose to act. This story isn't just about one gas station, it's about power. Who has it, who suffers, and what happens when someone dares to challenge it. But here's the real question. How many other places are just like Wayfield Gas 17? How many people are still afraid? Eleanor's battle isn't over. And maybe, just maybe, neither is ours. If you believe one voice can spark change, let's keep talking. Drop your thoughts below. And if you want more stories that challenge power, expose injustice, and inspire action, subscribe. Because this is just the beginning.